He was no stranger to being lonely, and he was no stranger to being miserable, but being unkind came easily to him. He would look around with his dark brown eyes and pull his long curly hair away from his face and look about this old village. It was old now, nearly as old as him, and it was ruined, but he'd been born there, and ever since he'd been a boy, he had lived in that place. But people had moved away. His family had moved away. Perhaps it was the fact that he was a thief, and everyone knew him as a thief. He would pull at the old cloak at his shoulders. It was short and made of feathers, feathers that no one had seen since the old times. Feathers that were purple at their stem, but red at their tip. It had been a beautiful thing when he had it as a son of his father, who was a priest at the temple that was now ruined in the old village. He loved to go out singing. He would sit in his canoe that smelt of the trees and the fields, and he would sing to the birds, but there were no more birds around this place. The village was still filled with the stench of rotting fish, because the river was close to the sea, and the river ran salty when the tide was highest. But he loved this place, and he was not going to move away. And even though his family had moved away from him, in the darkness of night he would go to the beautiful new city, and he would leave gold at their doorstep and gold at their window, and they would gasp in wonderment for the things that were left there. And they never dreamed in 100,000 lifetimes that would be him, because they only thought of him as being unkind. He pulled the rough cloth of his trousers up. He stomped the dust away from his bare feet. He was still strong, but now the river was silent, for the birds were resting for the day. Sometimes he would feed the birds to bring the birds closer to them. But in that place, in that great city, there lived a powerful king who ruled over this land. But he didn't like the city. He didn't like the fact that the water was clean. There was clean water to drink in the city, but he didn't like the taste. It was clean water. And I always liked to have that taste of salt from the river by the side of the village. He did not like the city. But he decided that if he was going to steal, then he might as well steal from the king. And the king was there walking through all of the city with the fine clothes upon his back. And as everyone else bent their heads down, the old man reached underneath the king's own cloak, and there he took a purse that was studded with jewels, a beautiful purse, a heavy purse. But the old man, when he ran back to the village, back to the place that he called his home since he had been a boy, when he looked inside of the purse, it was not filled with gold, it was filled with sand. For the king only looked as if he was rich. There were many people who lived inside of that city who were much richer than the king. And if the truth be known, the old man, with all of the things that he had stolen, he was indeed richer than the king himself. And he couldn't believe it, because the purse was empty. But the king, it didn't take him long to notice that the belt that he had about his waist was lighter, and the purse was gone. And as he retraced his steps through the city, everyone else bowed their heads down, and it was then that the king looked down and he saw that there was a feather that was purple at its spine and red at its tips. Only someone from the older times would wear such a thing, and he remembered an old man who hadn't bowed down. And the king now thought that he was going to find this old man, for he knew that his purse would have been taken by him. There was a majestic temple in the middle of the town, And it was then that he thought. In his father's time, he had spoken of a village that was at the mouth of the river by the side of the sea. And the king himself travelled out of the city and to that place. And sure enough, who could he see but the old man with the feathered cloak at his back, now ripped and old and scruffy. But he was counting out the gold that he had. The king smiled to himself. If you have gold, then I will take some of it for myself. And I think that you, the old man, was cowered down. He was cowering away from him. I think that you, spoke the king, I think that you should go around this town and give back the gold to those people who deserve it, the poor inside of my great city. And then I will think about what I shall do for you. Here, the king had a sword at his side. The old man thought that if the king was displeased, then the gods would be displeased. And the king would not wait for a single sigh to cut his heart from out of his chest and place it as a sacrifice at the top of the majestic temple. The old man said that he would give the gold to those who deserved it after the king had taken his fair lion's share. And night by night, and sometimes by day, the old man would leave gold by windows, by doors. But he knew that the king, even though he was an old man, and his blood would be sticky and old and would not appease the gods, he would sacrifice him himself upon the great slab at the top of the temple. The old man was never seen once all of the gold was gone. His family never received any gold. But sometimes when the king was at the top of the temple, he would sit there. And he wasn't sure, but sometimes he could hear birds singing. And above all of the birds' song, he could hear an old man's voice.